Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz by L. Frank Baum. This is part of L. Frank Baum's Land of Oz collection. I'm reading it out of the Complete Stories of Oz, although, of course, it was originally published as a separate book. Just a couple notes here. First of all, I'm doing this series as a buddy reads with Dane Reads. He's already posted his review of this, which I will link to in the description down below. So, the advantages of going to Dane's review of these books is he actually edits his videos. So they're short, succinct, and to the point, qualities which you will not find on this channel. Consider yourself forewarned. I'm probably going to ramble on about this book at length. With this particular review, he apparently lost the ending during a problem with the editing and copying files over. But he still makes some interesting points about the beginning of the book. It's unfortunate that the ending got lost, but it's a very short and sweet review at 5 minutes. So go over and check out Dane. The other thing is, this is my second time attempting to get through this collection. I attempted it once about 5 years ago. I made it all the way through, I think, the first five and a half books, essentially. So I've got some vague idea of a little bit that's coming next. This is my second time through this particular book. And then the other thing is I'm drawing, in addition to just the book itself, I'm drawing also on some of the information from Wikipedia and also from the website Tor.com. They had a reviewer, Mary Ness, who 10 years ago reviewed all the Oz books on their website, and I've been finding her reviews very insightful and have been drawing from some of that. Okay, all that background information out of the way, let's get into this. So this is book number 4. This is Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz. So note that it's not the Wizard of Oz. It's the Wizard in Oz. So this book marks the rehabilitation of the wizard, who was the infamous or whatever wizard in the original The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. So let's go through this briefly. If you've not read the original, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the Wizard of Oz in the original book is portrayed much the same way he is in the famous movie. He's not actually a wizard, he's a con man, a charlatan. They refer to him in these pages as a humbug, which I think is a bit of slang that has since gone out of date, but seems to have meant some sort of a con man. But one who ultimately had a good heart once Dorothy got through his charade and they figured out that he wasn't actually a fearsome wizard. So much the same in the original novel as it was in the movie. However, after the original novel was published back in 1902 or something, there was a stage play that L. Frank Baum also wrote, which was apparently very successful back in its day, and was not the same script that the movie was based off. So this is a completely different version of it that you've never seen, most likely. But according to Wikipedia, in that stage play, which ran in 1902, the Wizard of Oz was a villain. And he was responsible for overthrowing the original King of Oz, Pastoria, and establishing a tyrannical rule there through, I don't know, he was some sort of tyrant and a force of malevolence to be defeated. And that leaked in to the second book in the series, which is The Marvelous Land of Oz. So in The Marvelous Land of Oz, we get the backstory to Ozma, the Queen of Oz, and it turns out that as a baby, the wizard took her away and made an alliance with the evil witch Mombi and changed Ozma into a boy so that nobody would ever find out that she was the rightful ruler of Oz. So the Wizard of Oz was now the bad guy in the Marvelous Land of Oz, or was alluded to as such. He didn't actually appear in the book. Now in Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, he's now come back again as the humbug, the con artist with a heart of gold. He's come back as one of the good guys. Apparently, according to Wikipedia, the young readers of the series didn't like that L. Frank Baum was now making the Wizard of Oz into a villain, so he's now come back as one of the good guys. It surprises me somewhat that they didn't just go back and re-edit book number 2, because you really only need to make a couple tweaks and changes to align the continuity. That goes with a lot of the continuity problems early on in this series, when apparently L. Frank Baum was still figuring out what he was doing and still figuring out what he wanted to do. But yeah, because in this book, the Wizard of Oz was not part of Ozma being given to the Wicked Witch Mombi. That happened with another force. I don't remember. I think it was another one of the Wicked Witches that did it. So having made that retcon, because you know they do that all the time nowadays, right? Like when J.R.R. Tolkien published The Lord of the Rings, he went back and re-edited The Hobbit so that the continuity lined up, those kind of things. I don't know why they didn't go back and re-edit them and make a couple tweaks, but now 120 years later, we can still complain about the continuity problems because they never fixed it. They never went back and aligned the books. Anyways, the Wizard of Oz is back, and he's one of the good guys again. So the last book finished off with Ozma now has a magic belt, with which she can bring Dorothy back into the Land of Oz at any time. She also has a magic picture, which she can look at Dorothy through. And I said in my last review, okay, now we've established the magic belt, so Dorothy no longer has to get to the Land of Oz through natural disasters. Because in the first book, she got picked up by a cyclone. She wasn't in the second book, but then in the third book, she got washed away at sea. But now we've got the magic belt, so there's no more natural disasters. I completely forgot that in this book, she gets swallowed up by an earthquake. So the earth opens, Dorothy and her friends fall through the earth, and that's how they get, not to Oz, but to a different fairyland. So Dorothy being afflicted by natural disasters is still continuing, although that magic belt is going to come into play later. So there are a number of constants that seem to be through all these Oz stories. One is that it's always a journey through some sort of strange land where they meet strange things. Now, in the first 2 books, that land was Oz, but then Oz, it's shifted now so that Oz has become like the happy utopian place. And I think that utopian element of it is going to continue to get magnified in later books. So now the dangerous lands are the lands outside of Oz. So, for example, in book 3, it was the land of Ev in the Gnome King's kingdom. Now it's the center of the earth. The earth opens up and swallows them. And so the dangerous lands now are the center of the earth and all these places inside there. So they journey through dangerous lands. They encounter a lot of bizarre creatures. And it seems to be a constant as well with each of these Oz books that new friends are introduced. The old friends from the old books come back to make cameos. We'll get into that later, maybe. But new friends are introduced in each book. So in this book, Dorothy has a kitten named Eureka. The dog Toto is back in Kansas. Dorothy is in California visiting some relatives. and she meets up with a boy who's, I forget if he's a cousin of hers or something. He's somehow connected to a friend of her uncle's, a distant relative maybe, and then the horse who's drawing the cart, which they call a cab horse. The horse is named Jim, and the boy is named Zeb, which sometimes I got them confused because it seems like Jim should be the name of the boy, right? They kept referring to Jim, and I kept thinking, okay, this is the boy, and I'm like, no. Jim is the name of the horse. Zeb is the boy. Zeb seems like a weird name to give a boy. I thought they should name the horse Zeb, but whatever. So we've got Zeb, Jim, Dorothy, and Eureka the Kitten. The earth opens up and swallows them, and they are falling down. Now, this is one of those books where the earth is hollow. So they're falling, and they're falling, and they're falling, and then as they're falling, they can look below and they can see there are these, I think it was 6 suns down below. Each sun was a different color. And that's providing illumination for the whole place. And they're falling and they pass the suns, and then their fall starts to slow. So they're not actually falling, they're kind of floating down in the air, down to this area where all the houses are made of glass. And they fall down and they land on one of these glass houses, and we've got 6 different colored suns up in the air, which are not only illuminating the place, but making them, as the different colors are reflecting, it's one area will be pink, and then I think the suns are rotating around, so the colors are changing, so the colors are being in rotation with the suns. And because there's not a lot of gravity at the center of the earth, not only do they float down, but then once they land on one of the roofs of these glass buildings, they discover that they can actually just walk in the air. So they can just walk in the air and walk down. And the people who inhabit this land, well, they're not actually people, they're some sort of vegetables, sentient vegetables, humanoid type vegetables. Which have this whole life cycle where if they're killed or if they die, they get planted into the ground, and then new vegetable people will sprout up. They're called the land of the megaboos. So, for example, one of them is killed, and then they're put back in the public garden. And the glass in this land is some sort of organic glass. It grows by itself. And apparently has made all these buildings and all these glass bridges by itself. It grows very slowly, though, so the vegetable people are very upset when the rocks fall down from the surface of the earth and make holes in their houses. And I remember my first time reading through this series, reading this about 5 years ago, and thinking to myself, boy, this is really getting a little bit trippy. Like, it seems like some sort of psychedelic wonderland to me. And it's interesting to think that this was written all the way back in 1908 or whenever it was, well before the age of psychedelics. That was at least the first thought that passed through my mind. Now, I've since kind of thought this over a little bit, and maybe that was kind of a stupid thing to think, because people can be imaginative without the aid of drugs, certainly, and perhaps I just haven't read enough fantasy, and perhaps come to think of it, it's not all that different from the other books in the series of Oz. They're always going to strange lands and encountering strange creatures, but it just seemed a little bit stranger and a little bit trippier than all the other lands. It's also, the story is a bit more violent. I should mention that this story definitely has its critics. According to Wikipedia, so this is the 4th book, and at this point, L. Frank Baum has decided he's doing a series, and he's going to crank as much money out of this Oz series as he can. So the first book was supposed to be just a one-off thing. Second book was just supposed to be a one-off sequel. But by the third book, he had decided he was going to be doing a series. So the first and second and third books, there's a lot of time separating them. But when we come to the fourth book, in terms of publication date, the third and the fourth, it follows very closely on the heels of the third book. So that people say he just kind of rushed it out and it's not very well plotted and stuff like that. And in terms of like making logical sense, maybe it's not very well plotted, but I just find it so bizarre and pretty violent as well. Although again, the first book in the Land of Oz had a pretty high body count as well. They're not graphically violent. They're violent in the way like the Brothers Grimm are violent, whereas a decent body count, but nothing described graphically. But yeah, they've been swallowed by the earth, and then the wizard comes down. So again, this is the Wizard of Oz I was talking about earlier. He's in a hot air balloon again, which is how he left Oz the first time. Apparently, he had been working for a circus. He's a little bit worn out and getting too old for it. He was up in his hot air balloon trying to drum up business for the circus, and then when he came down, he got swallowed up by that same earthquake that swallowed up the rest of them. So the vegetable people do not want them in their land. And there's a vegetable sorcerer who's got like thorns on him all over because he's like a vegetable person. And the Wizard of Oz immediately realized that their sorcerer is a humbug just like he is. He's a con artist who has fooled everyone else into making them think that he has prophetic powers, even though he can't prophesize anything. So that they do magic tricks for the Wizard of Oz to try and show the vegetable people that he's actually more powerful of a sorcerer than the one they have. The Wizard of Oz has 9 little piglets, which he got from somebody who went to like a teeny tiny land or something like that, a land where everything is miniature. So they're piglets, but they're like really small piglets, like the size of a mouse. And he's able to do all these tricks with the piglets where he pulls out one of them and it makes it look like he's pulling out 9 of them. Sorry, he pulls out one of them and it makes it look like he's able to create 9 just from pulling them apart, even though it's all some sort of sleight of hand. Exactly how he's doing the sleight of hand is not described, but I guess you're just supposed to imagine that magicians do this type of thing all the time. And then, because they're in the fairyland, they're not in Oz, but they're another sort of fairyland, all the animals can now talk. So the 9 miniature little piglets who are the size of mice and are running around can talk. Eureka the Kitten can talk, and Jim the horse can talk. Toto, in the original book, never talked when they brought him to the Land of Oz. And I believe that continuity error or problem is going to be addressed in the next book, if I remember right. I don't remember how they address it, but I think they address that somehow. Anyways, and the confrontation between the wonderful Wizard of Oz and the Vegetable Sorcerer ends when the Vegetable Sorcerer is able to stop Oz's breath somehow. It's not explained how he can do this. So apparently he does have some powers after all. And then Oz takes out a sword, which he's got like this sword he can put together, and he's able to slice through the Vegetable Sorcerer. Mary Ness over on Tor.com said that scene used to give her nightmares as a kid. Unfortunately, there are no illustrations in this book here, but according to Wikipedia, this is one of only 2 books in the L. Frank Baum original Oz series that had watercolor illustrations. And if you go to the copy on Project Gutenberg, you can see the illustrations. So I went and I looked at the illustrations after I had finished the book. And sure enough, there's a picture of the thorn guy sorcerer getting sliced in half. So now they say, okay, well, now he needs to be planted. So I guess when somebody dies, they get planted in the garden and new plants sprout up. And it wasn't entirely clear to me if the original person got regenerated, or if the original person was dead and then just new vegetable people came out from their organic material. But there was a princess in the garden, a vegetable princess, who was described as being very beautiful, who is waiting to be picked. And the current leader says, no, she's not ripe enough to be picked yet. We have to leave her there. Somebody at Tor.com said this was a pun about picking a leader, which I didn't actually catch when I was reading it. But yeah, maybe pick a leader, maybe it is. So they pick the princess because she's on the vine, but when they're still on the vine, they're like in this frozen state. But when they get picked, then they can move around. So because the princess has now been picked, she's now the new ruler of the vegetable kingdom, and the other guy has to go away. But yeah, they still have this trouble where the vegetable people don't want them. So the wizard has some sort of he creates this ring of fire using gasoline, and again he's trying to show off his magic. And he tells the princess to make her advisors walk through the fire. And he says if they have advised you well, they'll be able to walk through the fire. If they haven't advised you well, then they will wither in the fire. They don't want to do it, but the princess orders them to. And of course, they get burned up by the fire and wither, which is another one of these, chalk up the body counts in this story. It's a little bit... Yeah, it's got a little bit of a violent edge, but again, the first book had a high body count as well. Anyways, in spite of this, eventually the vegetable people turn against them, and they get walled up in this cave in the mountain. But then they realize that this cave keeps going. So it's not like a dead end. They can keep going through, and they keep going through, and then they get to the other side. And there's this beautiful valley. Again, they're still somewhere underneath the earth. It's still being illuminated somehow. It doesn't say how, but it doesn't have multicolored suns now. But everybody in this valley is invisible. And they're invisible because they eat a special peach, a peach-like thing, which grows in the valley and makes you invisible. So Dorothy and the wizard and the others in the group don't want to eat it. But the people in the valley said, well, you've got to eat it because otherwise the invisible bears will get you. So there are now invisible bears in the story. And I am totally here for a story about invisible bears. The people are talking about their champion who went up the pyramid and fought the gargoyles. But then he got eaten. Their champion got eaten by the bears. And Dorothy said, well, if everyone's invisible, how are you sure that he got eaten by the bears? And they say, if somebody gets killed, they're visible again. So because his body parts were strewn everywhere, spread out, his body parts were spread out when the bears devoured him. We know that the bears got him, even though the bears were still invisible. I'm not quite sure how the bears found him, actually, because I think it's established that if you're invisible, that's protection from the invisible bears. Somehow the bears found him. But they don't want to be invisible because they don't want to lose track of each other, except for the 9 little piglets who eat the fruit anyways, and now they're running around and they're invisible. But they want to get back up to the surface of the earth. They know that they find out that there's this big pyramid that they can climb up to try and get, hopefully, to the surface of the earth, to get somewhere higher up. But there are gargoyles up at the top of the pyramid. But they start heading for the pyramid anyways, and then they get attacked by the invisible bears. I think that the wizard kills one of them by his sword, but the horse gets a bit scratched up by the invisible bears before he's able to free himself. But they get advised by an invisible girl that there's a special leaf, I think it is, that they can rub on their feet, and then they can run on the river. So like they can run on the surface of the river and not sink into the river. And the bears don't know about this. So this is another way in which the people keep themselves safe from the bears. So they all rub this special leaf on their feet, and now they're able to run through the river. And then they get to this pyramid, and they're climbing up the pyramid, and there are these stairs that go around and around the pyramid, and they get to a very high point, and they look out, and from the view of the pyramid, I guess they can see the ocean down beneath. I guess this must be like the land's on one side and the ocean's on the other. And they can see clouds, and there's cloud fairies sitting on each of the clouds. And then down below, they can see all these different kinds of birds flying around down below the clouds, and then the oceans. And again, it's such... And I'm reading this without the benefit of illustrations, because there's no illustrations in this volume, which is a pity, because the illustrations, I think, are a big part of the book. But to a certain extent, it's more fun to imagine this kind of stuff. All this trippy stuff with invisible bears and vegetable people and different colored suns and the glass houses and the pyramids and the fairies on the clouds and the birds in the ocean. It's just wonderfully bizarre, and it's fun to read through this. Then they get up to the next level of the pyramids, which is the land of the gargoyles, and it turns out that they are wooden gargoyles. And the gargoyles just attack everyone who enters their land. So the gargoyles attack them. And the wizard pulls out his two guns. And he's able to shoot at them with his guns. So, I mean, like, here's another thing you probably didn't expect with the Wizard of Oz book. Is the wizard from Oz is now shooting at gargoyles with his guns, right? You don't usually picture the wizard from the Wizard of Oz shooting guns, but the noise frightens away the gargoyles. The bullet actually doesn't do much, because I guess they're just solid wood, so the bullet kind of embeds into them and gives them a bit of a stuns them a bit, but doesn't seriously harm them. Although one of the gargoyles that they do stun, Zeb the boy is able to tie him up, and then he picks him up and he uses him as a club to fight the other gargoyles. But eventually the gargoyles overwhelm them and put them in some sort of prison. But they escape, and they are able to get some of the gargoyles' wooden wings and put them on everyone. So now everyone is flying with the gargoyles' wooden wings, escaping from prison, and then the gargoyles find out that they escaped and they're chasing after them. But they get into... what was the next stage? They're already in the pyramid, but I think there's some sort of big oval inside the pyramid. They get into it, and then there are dragonettes in that oval, which are young dragons that are still growing up. And the dragonettes want to eat them, but they can't eat them because their mother has secured their tails to the walls of the cave to keep them out of trouble. So the dragonettes are just able to talk about how much they would like to eat them. But their mother is returning. So they've got to get out of here before their mother is returning. So they go down one cave hoping they were able to get through, and there's some sort of revolving door that they've got to get past. I just find the whole thing really bizarre, but in really trippy and weird, but in a fun way. As you know, I mean, on one hand, it all seems to be lazy writing or something like that, but on the other hand, it seems to be really brilliant and inspired writing. If you catch my meaning. Eventually, they get to where they're almost at the surface of the earth, but they're trapped. They can't quite get through to they're in this cave and they can see the sun outside, but they can't quite get through. And then Dorothy remembers Ozma and the magic belt. So, yeah, Ozma and the magic belt. It's established in the previous book that that Ozma will look at Dorothy once a week on a Saturday morning. They don't set a time, just all morning, I guess, through some sort of magic picture. Dorothy gives her the signal, and then Ozma's able to whisk her away to Oz. I believe Mary Ness over on Tor.com gave a little bit of forewarning that this magic belt is going to be used to Deus Ex Machina, I believe is the phrase, kind of resolve a lot of plots out of magic. And this is arguably, I guess, one of them. They're almost out of Oz. Sorry, they're almost out of the underground chamber. They can't quite get there. They're trapped, and then Ozma's coming in with her magic belt. The other thing which Dane pointed out to me in a comment is that they've changed the times now. In the previous book, it was Saturday morning. Now it's 4 o'clock on a Saturday. So another continuity error. According to Wikipedia, which also picks up this continuity error in its entry on this book, apparently there's a retcon in later Oz books that say apparently there was some sort of meeting between Dorothy and Ozma in between books where they changed the time to 4 o'clock. I don't know why they bothered fixing that particular continuity error when there are so many other continuity errors. I don't know. Maybe there's an explanation for all the continuity errors. So Ozma is able to wish them back into the land of Oz, so they're saved from their adventures under the earth, not by their own smarts or their own cunning in the end, just because Ozma wishes them back. And now they are back in Oz. Now, once they get back in Oz, the action slows down a bit, and we do what I think Marie Ness at Tor.com calls the roundup section, where we get back all the characters who have appeared in previous books to make cameo appearances. So the Cowardly Lion, the Hungry Tiger, the Scarecrow, the Woodman, Tick Tock, the Wogglebug, Gump, who had been that flying machine thing. The kind of moose head type thing. If you've seen The Return of Oz, you know what I'm talking about. He makes a brief cameo appearance, and things slow down a bit. Although we do have some sort of antagonism going on between Jim the real horse and then the sawhorse. So the sawhorse is from the previous two books 2 and 3. He's a sawhorse, which is, I guess, something people used to rest logs on when they sawed it, I think, which has been turned into something alive by magic powder. And it in Oz now, nobody knows what a real horse is, so they don't know what to make out of Jim the real horse, but they do have the sawhorse. And I was reading this and I thought, this seems wrong. I'm sure I remember references to horses in the previous books. And I don't remember, I didn't check everything in the previous books, but I went back and checked when the sawhorse was being created. And sure enough, Tip, the boy who was creating him, who would later on become Ozma, was comparing him to a real horse, saying, okay, you're not really a real horse, but you're like a real horse. It seemed obvious that there were horses in the land of Oz, but that's been retconned now, or changed now, so that there are no horses in the land of Oz. Jim is the first horse anyone has ever seen. Nobody knows quite what to do with him. And also, Eureka the Kitten gets accused of eating one of the piglets. Now, Eureka the Kitten, I haven't talked about her yet, but kind of a strange character here. So, Dorothy starts off, she doesn't have her dog Toto with her because she's in California and Toto's back in Kansas. But she has a kitten with her. Um, and you think, oh, okay, L. Frank Baum is writing for children here. We have a cute little kitten who's going to go into the land of Oz and have cute little adventures. Except Eureka the Kitten turns out to be not a very nice character at all once she gets the power of speech. She does a couple of cute kitten little things, but for the most part, is extremely selfish. I think Dane said in one of his comments about this story that L. Frank Baum doesn't seem to have been a cat person. And keeps making comments about how she would like to eat the piglets. And then one of the piglets goes missing, and Ozma puts on Eureka on trial for her life, because if it turns out Eureka has eaten the piglet, then she's going to get the death penalty. So this is, I think Murray Ness points this out at Tor.com. This is a rather vindictive side of Ozma, which is later going to be in contrast with the view of Oz that's going to establish where nobody dies. But here Oz still has the death penalty. And it's a rather poorly managed trial at that. Marie Ness, I think, in her reviews has this theme where Ozma is a very incapable ruler who just always messes everything up. So the Wogglebug is the prosecutor, the Tin Woodman is the defender. It turns out, though, at the end, that the little piglet is alive. Eureka the Kitten didn't eat the piglet. Eureka wanted to eat the piglet, but then it fell into the vase and got trapped into the vase, depending on your pronunciation. Now, this is another thing that doesn't entirely make sense, because throughout the book, it's established that when Eureka is hungry, she wants to eat the piglets. But as long as Eureka has a full belly, if she's been given something to eat, then she's perfectly happy to play with the piglets, and they have lots of fun playing together. It's only when she gets really hungry that she contemplates eating them. Now they're back in the land of Oz. Everyone's getting as much to eat as they want. So why does Eureka the Kitten try to eat the piglet now? It's just one of many things that don't make sense. So making logical sense is not a strong point of this series. But really strange visuals and fantastic creatures is the strong point. So pluses and minuses. Although I believe I said in one of my previous reviews that sometimes I get the sense that stuff not making sense is meant to be part of the satire. You know, like Terry Pratchett or Douglas Adams or something like that. Maybe that's me being a little bit generous. I don't know, or is it? Maybe it's all just part of the satire. I definitely get that feeling with some of the elements in here. Eventually, Zeb and Jim the cab horse go back to California. I guess everyone goes back to California, but Zeb and Jim the cab horse do not really fit in the land of Oz. Jim the cab horse, especially after he loses a race to the sawhorse, becomes very bitter about it, kicks the sawhorse, and then gets tackled by the hungry tiger and humiliated twice over. First by losing the race to the sawhorse, and then by getting knocked down by the tiger after he kicked the sawhorse in a fit of anger. Marie Ness over at Tor.com suggests that maybe this is meant to be symbolic of the fear of workers losing their jobs to automation. And she connects this with what was going on with TikTok, the machine man in the previous book, who makes a cameo in this book. But the machine man in the previous book, who she says, throughout that book, everyone was agreeing that a machine man was not as good as being alive. And perhaps it was a commentary on the automation of factories or workers losing their jobs to machines. But Marie Ness also makes a point in her review. She says, Jim and Zeb seem to be the only visitors to Oz from the real world who are underwhelmed by it, don't really like it, don't really feel like they fit in, and never come back to it. Well, she also has a hypothesis that this book was rushed out by L. Frank Baum. Baum, is it? So something that Wikipedia also hints at. And so she says that a lot of the characters in this book, he didn't bother bringing back. He didn't bring them back, perhaps because he didn't feel attachment to this book. So I guess almost all the other books, there are new characters introduced in each book in the series, and then those characters become part of the Oz family, and that the cast of characters keep getting larger and larger with each book. But apparently, Jim the cab horse and Zeb never end up coming back. So, by the way, spoilers. Sorry, I should have put that at the beginning of the book. I'm going to spoil everything. So yeah, I've talked through the whole plot, I think. What else was there in here that was worth talking about? Okay, so the Wizard of Oz is back. And the Wizard of Oz now becomes a permanent fixture in Oz. Going back to the real world didn't work out. He was too old and worn out to join the circus. Plus, the people of Oz really love him and miss him. We've retconned what was in the second book now, which was itself a retcon. So the wizard is now going to be a permanent fixture now in these Oz books. And I believe he's going to be like an inventor and a problem solver throughout these other books. And yeah, I mean, all in all, there's a lot to be critical of in this book. I mean, another thing that doesn't really make logical sense is characters frequently know things or have perspectives that there's no way they'd know them. Jim the horse just getting the gift of speech as soon as he's able to enter the fairyland, and he's able to debate semantics with them about the difference between climbing up and climbing down. The wizard, even though he hasn't been with Dorothy on her previous adventures, seems to have some knowledge of what happened with the battle against the Gnome King. The princess in the Vegetable Kingdom, even though she's just been freshly picked from the vine, seems to have a knowledge of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate in the land of the Vegetable Kingdom. All these kind of things where characters seem to know what the reader would know instead of what the character themselves in their position would actually know. That's another thing you could nitpick in these books. But I still found this book so wonderfully bizarre. I mean, those scenes in the Vegetable Kingdom, the invisible bears, the pyramid looking out with the cloud fairies and the birds, the wooden gargoyles. Yeah. When I first tried to get through this series and then stopped reading it 5 years ago, during the past 5 years, those are the scenes that have stuck in my mind about how bizarre and trippy these Oz books can be. So